is on standby with economist David Ndii. Sophia.
Thank you very much, Ken, for that, just outlining some of what these candidates or aspirants at this point are talking about, what they would do if they are in charge. 2022 general election, the countdown is on, and clearly the issue that is shaping that election is this battle for economic models, and several of them have been put out. Brian George as well had outlined some of those in his story and what these candidates have been saying. And a man who's worked with those two candidates and even others, who of course Ken will be giving us more details later on, is David Ndii, who is an economist. He joins me live here in our newsroom. Thank you so much for making time for KIVUMBI. And it will be important for our viewers to also know you wrote the chapter in our constitution on public finance. So if there's anyone who knows what he's talking about tonight, it is you. Thank you again for making time for this show. And I'd like us to begin with what the problem is. Clearly, this is what everybody is speaking to be the issue of focus. This is what appears to be resonating also with the masses. They want to hear, how will our lives be improved? How will the economy work better in as far as powering growth, but putting food on the table and those jobs for the unemployed? But from where you sit, the state of Kenya's economy today, how do you describe it?
It's a long story. I think to contextualize it properly, I think why the economy has become such a big issue, I call it a historical inevitability, that it was going to end up there. So there's a long underlying problem that has been with us for a long time.
Yes.
Second one you've mentioned BBI, and the third one has to do with some of the things that have happened at the Jubilee and also the impact of COVID. But the most important one, I think, to understand why this is becoming an issue, let me just highlight a few historical things.
Yeah.
In 1967, the NCCK wrote a report titled Who Controls Industry in Kenya, in which it warned that there was a small managerial elite that was accumulating a lot of economic and political power.
Right.
And that was a threat to the country. You can't find that report now. They tried to do a follow-up in 72 or 3, and that was banned, and some of the people are deported. In 1972, the ILO wrote a very important report, one of the very important, called Employment Inequality and Incomes in Kenya. It said that since independence, concentration of economic power at the top had increased. Yeah? And so it was following up on the NCCK and said, Kenya, the concentration of economic power, and that is undermining the creation of opportunity for other people. The second thing the ILO report did is introduce the language of informal sector.
Right.
And it said that there was a huge bias against the informal sector among the elite, even though the informal sector, as it said, was the future source of jobs and wealth for the Kenyan economy.
Right.
But they berated, they sort of had a sing in it, and they said, but the Kenyan elite, sitting in their steel and glass towers in the middle of Nairobi, looking down at the hovels of the informal sector, that would require a lot of imagination for them to see the informal sector as the future of Kenya. Fast forward, 1986, we write a sessional paper, and we said, this employment problem, we have a population growth challenge, and employment has become a very serious problem for the youth. Unless we change the structure of the economy, this problem is going to overwhelm us.
Yes.
And again, it says, jobs are going to come from the informal sector, small enterprises, because creating a job, there's too much concentration of power and capital. Creating a job in the formal economy is too expensive. It's too capital intensive.
Right.
In fact, it put the figure at 16,000 pounds, which was 320,000 shillings, which at the time would have been $20,000. Now, the average cost of creating a job in developing countries is $2,000 in terms of capital. Ours was 10 times in 1986. Fast forward.
Yes.
2003, problem has gotten even more severe. In 1970, when ILO was writing, our labor force was 1 million people. When sessional paper in 1986, it was about 2.5 million. 2003, when NAC was coming to power, it was 12 million people. And NAC promises to create jobs. We write an economic recovery strategy for job creation, and it says very clearly, the economic growth is not sufficient. We have to focus on the small enterprises and resource-poor farmers.
Right.
Grow from the bottom. 3 years later, I was invited to evaluate that program, and it had been killed. And we wrote as much as said, look, we promise people jobs.
Yeah.
The bureaucracy has restored the old system, and this is going to have a big blowback on the NAC government, and it does. You fast forward. Yes. So, same thing. Again and again and again. So what do you end up with now? You end up with a workforce of 20 million people.
Right.
That concentration of power, that economy which the ILO talked about in 1971, only employs 2 million people. The government employs another 1 million, public. So the other 17, 18 million people are in the Juakali. They are the people we are calling hustlers. So it was only a matter of time. This ticking time bomb
of the economy.
We've been told about it, we've talked about it, but there has been strong resistance to creating and doing what it requires to do an economy which creates opportunities for them. Everyone.
And yet, in fairness, to the point you make that is what this bottom-up is seeking to do, the Deputy President has been Deputy President now the 9th year. They're about to finish their term, isn't it? So these are things that for many people wonder, is it just to speak to what resonates or sounds good or sounds different? Why not do it when you've had the opportunity to, sir?
I don't think that, from my conversations with him, that he was actually alive to the nature of this problem 2 years ago. He wasn't.
So a leader who has been in office but has not figured him. What has ailed
it's not just him.
The country?
Jubilee came to power on a you have to go back. What Jubilee started with mega infrastructure projects is Vision 2030.
Yeah.
So when we did ERS in 2003, when the NAC government fell apart, came other people, did Vision 2030, changed from that inclusive growth from the bottom back to trickle-down mega infrastructure projects.
Right.
So the Jubilee government came on a continuity agenda of Vision 2030. What they did was scale it up. They thought they were doing the right thing. I kept shouting that you're doing too much too quickly, and you're going to create macroeconomic
But this is what the Deputy President, sir, sorry to interject, said on Madaraka Day. He promised President Uhuru Kenyatta that I will secure your legacy. Of all the projects you have done, I'm the person who will ensure I finish them. So he made it clear in that speech he's not intending to depart from what you're saying now. Was the issue from the beginning that there should have been a different trajectory?
You should listen carefully.
Yes.
There is nothing wrong with building infrastructure. The problem, as I said, is that they are doing too much too quickly.
Okay.
And they borrowed excessively. Part of the borrowing, what it did, was to crowd out the private sector.
Right.
The people who took the brunt from that crowding out in the market were small enterprises.
Right.
Okay? So if you've already got an investment program, you've got to complete it. Because otherwise, if you stop, you can't stop projects in the middle. But in terms of, if you listen again, he says, but we need to realign.
Yeah.
He said, we have put too much money in public capital. We need to shift. But I don't think that was his thinking more than, I remember having a conversation with him 3 years ago, so the first time actually.
Yeah.
And he said, I am only beginning to realize that there's something wrong with our economic model. Because we keep doing things which we think we solve the problem, and they don't. Okay? So he's not the only one. People are cheering all these infrastructure projects. People are cheering the borrowing. I said, these has been a mindset of the Kenyan state since 1960 something. Okay? So it would be too much to ask that somebody to have had 2020 vision when he's been part of it.
It's all catching up clearly with the country, as you said. The debt is huge. And I think it was you who was talking about this debt is like got us in a situation where we're like on a treadmill. You're running and you literally, if you stop, you're going to drop. And so you're borrowing this side to pay this other guy, and then you keep with this vicious cycle. So when you hear all of these models and you hear what Raila Odinga is proposing to do, you've worked with him, you hear what Mudavadi is talking about. He's talked about debt many times, and that we need to cut down on tax. These plans and the things the politicians are saying, for ordinary Mwananchi, the bottom line is, will it fix the problem?
What problem?
The problem that the economy gets and finds itself in today, that it is one that needs a quick turnaround plan. Otherwise, things are debt is...
It's not a quick turnaround plan you need. You need to deal with that fundamental problem I have talked about from 1967.
Okay.
Concentration of economic power. Because the people who have... The reason why our economy is so capital intensive, they talked about $20,000 in '86. It's come down. In manufacturing, it is $10,000 today, which is $1 million shillings.
Yes.
In India, it's $2,000 to create a manufacturing job. In Bangladesh, it's $1,000. So what it takes to create one job in Kenya creates 10 jobs in Bangladesh or vice versa. Why? Because their jobs are labor intensive. You look at Bangladesh industry, it's mostly this labor intensive. It's now the world's biggest maker of apparel and garments and things. And we started this at the same time. But they are doing something like $30 billion. We are doing only $600 million. Why? If you look at our manufacturing, it is steel, cement. If you look at even the service sector, something like tourism, hotel industry, it takes $50,000 to create one hotel job. Okay, in tourism. But it creates a lot of profits for the hotel owners. But the country's capital is being concentrated where it creates a lot of returns to capital for a few people and does not create jobs and incomes for the majority.
For the majority of the
That's
people.
not a new problem. It's because the people who control the state, they are also the owners of capital. So it's a political economy problem, not an economic policy problem.
The policies, the ideas are there, the proposals are there and have been given. But so political will then is
yes,
what we're...
it's a political economy problem because the people who owners of capital would be enacting policies which are against their own interests. Okay? So you don't expect them to do policies which redistribute capital to the bottom and create competition for their businesses and reduce their profitability.
Okay.
Yeah? So it is not that the policies are not there. I have listed that these policies have been written year in, year out. They have been resisted by interests. Okay.
And we'll talk a little bit more about even when you were working with Raila Odinga and at some point the issue of two manifestos emerging as a discussion point, and what is it you pushed for then, and whether he has stayed true or has he been consistent in as far as what kind of a country he sees Kenya being economically speaking. So we'll talk about that when we come back from this short break. Please stay with KIVUMBI 2022.